Good morning, everybody. In the absence of the Chair, Councillor Peel, the first item for today's meeting is the appointment of Chair for this meeting. Can I have nominations, please?
Could I nominate Councillor Howarth?
Thank you. Is that seconded?
I'll second that.
That's seconded. Are there any other nominations? No. Councillor Howarth assumes the chair, please.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the nominations. Welcome to the Audit Committee. Our first item today is, are there any declaration of interest from anybody on the meeting today? Okay, the second thing I want to say is that just some housekeeping. I think we indicate in the chat box when we want to speak, and if for some reason I don't see an indication, please just unmute and identify that to me. I think that's probably the best way to go forward with this. The next thing is, are there any, there's no urgent business that I've been informed of, members. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, just Councillor Peel, and Councillor Zaman is hopefully coming on in place.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The next item we have is the minutes of the last meeting, and we need to approve these minutes. Is there anything anybody wants to raise about the minutes at all? And if not, does anybody who was at the meeting want to propose we accept the minutes? And
Chair, can I move that we accept the minutes, but just one quick comment. I understand we will get feedback on the objection later in the meeting. Is that correct?
yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hayes, and I'll need a reminder about that because I think the papers indicate that that will come up when the external auditors on the second item feedback, but please remind me about that. Okay, minutes are nominated. Everybody happy with the minutes? Do I need a seconder for the minutes?
Yes, please, if possible.
Yes. Is anybody available? I could second the minutes, perhaps, Mr. Mulholland.
That's fine.
Yes,
That's
thanks
fine.
so much. So that's the minutes accepted. Okay, thanks very much. I just need to flick back to the agenda. Forgive me about this. I'll try and improve this situation. Right, the next item on the agenda is the statement of the accounts, 2019-2020 year, and the statement of accounts is for approval. We've got the two documents, the introductory document and the very large statement of accounts, 144 pages, and this is to be introduced by the head of corporate finance, Tony Glennon, and we've got the deputy chief executive, Sue Johnson, with us as well.
Just to highlight, Chair, that anything for approval will need members to indicate, so I can record it. Anything else for noting, will, there's no need for a vote. Thank you. Right.
So, okay, so this item you'll likely do a vote after we've heard about this and given comments. And
yes,
so
please.
That's fine. Happy for the officers to give us any information now then on this item. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I hope you can hear me. It's not changed yet. Can you hear me? Ah, there we go. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I was waiting for the box to come round my picture before I started. So thanks, Chair. Presented as Appendix 1 is the Statement of Accounts for 2019-20 for approval. The deadline to publish the unaudited accounts was moved from the end of May to the end of August. However, in spite of the tremendous upheaval from March onwards, the unaudited accounts were published by the second week of June, allowing Mazars to commence their external audit. As you know from the agenda, Mazars will go into more detail on their audit process next. However, I'm pleased to note that there were only presentational changes required to the statement. That's all I want to say, Chair. Thanks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hayes, please.
Yes, thank you. She says waiting. Yes, thank you, Chair. A very unusual situation, actually. I have to query the figures in part of it. Probably the most confusing bit is the makeup of the council, political leadership. It adds up to 60 councillors, and I'm pretty sure there were only 59 at the time that that this was compiled. I'll say it's probably the most complicated bit of figures we've got in the whole of the council. How many groups and people there are?
Yeah.
There was a vacancy in West Taunton, North and Tumor, and if my addition's right, it adds up to 60. It could be 59.
Thanks, Chair. I would need to check that because we do just get the figures separately from other sources. But as far as we're at the 31st of March, that's what the makeup was. So I can check that and clarify.
Well, I'm not exactly sure when Councillor Mrs. Wild died, but I'm pretty sure she wasn't on the council at that stage. So.
Okay, I will double check that.
Thanks very much. Councillor Cox, Deputy Leader, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering if somebody, it might be Sue, could just talk us through page 21, the appendix to the statement of accounts, which of course is the income and expenditure statement. I think it's probably the most significant set of figures in the accounts. It shows a deficit of £85 million a year. Can somebody just perhaps put some perspective on that for councillors and explain how that figure's arrived at?
I think I'll let Tony do the technical answer first. That's okay.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's a mixture of figures. There are obviously things that are within the statement of within the individual departmental service figures. There are some non-accounting entries that get included there, some around reserve movements, etc., which are actually unusable reserves. So they tend to skew the figures to a certain degree. So that's why it can change and become a deficit. For example, if there are some kind of revaluation in the year that appear in some of those figures. So it can be a little bit of a misnomer when you look at it, but overall, as in terms of the year, the accounts balanced, and we did an albeit small transfer from reserves to ensure that there was no overall imbalance at the year end.
Does that income? Sorry. Right. Yeah. Does that income and expenditure statement regularly produce that deficit at the end of the year, or does it swing between deficits and surplus depending on movements?
It depends on movements, but certainly you can see from the 1819 and the 1920 it was in a similar position.
Okay, I just one other thing, Chair, if I could, just on the not the very bottom line, but the second to the bottom line, taxation and non-specific grant income. That does show smaller figure for 1920 to 1819 of 239 million. I appreciate there's non-specific grant income in there. Is that what leads to the difference? Because I would have thought the taxation figure should be more or less the same, if not a bit more.
Yes, on note 36, that expands those particular figures, so you can see where things have changed from year on year. That's page 95. So the council tax has increased by 4 million, whereas one of the non-specific grants is around capital grants, which is reduced.
Right. Okay. Well, there's 104. There's 145 pages of this. I'll be surprised if councils have got through it all, but it is a very comprehensive statement of accounts, and I think if anybody wants to check any details, they're there for public record. Is there? I always like to ask this question, whatever audit committee is there anything in there that we might not have seen that we should have seen? Is there anything significant in there that members ought to be aware of? Say, given it is a document of 44,000 words and 145 pages.
I don't believe there is anything such like that. It's one of the reasons we do try and declutter it, but unfortunately, if you do try and declutter it, then it can be the case that you don't put sufficient in, and then you have to put more back in. So we do try and keep it as concise as we can. But no, I'm not aware of anything. I'm sure the auditors would pick up on it if there was.
Right. Thanks for that, Tony. Much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. I've just a few comments to make. The introduction makes clear that the council finance team produced an unaudited statement, as Mr. Glennon referred to, of accounts by mid-June, which is within 2 weeks of the original deadline. This was achieved during a major coronavirus upheaval to staff's way of working at the council, as offices were emptied and staff worked from home. So I think all of us would back me saying a huge congratulations to the finance team, to each and every one of you who worked hard in this very difficult period to bring this very detailed statement of accounts and associated reports to the audit committee today, and at various council meetings, of course. So thanks very much. The coronavirus matters started in February, and there's unsurprisingly reference to the finance matters with government in particular that have come from that period, and reports that we also have, not on this meeting, but that councillors see, show that UK local authorities are set to be hardest hit financially by coronavirus among the 5 largest European economies. They describe councils here as having a weak base pre-COVID, likely related to possibly the austerity years. And the UK is hit by regional income inequalities, which is significant in deprived areas. And as we know, we've got deprivation that we like to provide services for and support in Bolton. Reports expect the pandemic to exert more fiscal pressure on poorer councils and exacerbate even income inequalities. And this is particularly acute in the UK, where local authorities have significant responsibilities for social protection expenditure, as I just referred to. The mortality rates from the coronavirus are strongly correlated with area-based deprivation. This is problematic. Can be seen as something of a bleak forward position for the council. The last thing I want to mention is that when the emergency funding 2, as it's described in this report, was distributed by the government, it's on page 6, I think, the analysis that was carried out by external bodies found that around 100 of this 100 million in this emergency funding was lost from poorer areas of England, because the government chose to take out the deprivation factor from the calculations that we used to determine how much areas should receive at that time. That's problematic, and it will be problematic if that is a forward position of making calculations for what finance comes to councils in the future. The emergency 2 funding package was a strictly per number of population calculation, which is very difficult for this council and others that have a real need in their populations for the provision of services and support. So a question I need to ask officers is that I heard that the figures at the present time seem to be, I think I can ask on this report because this is where these matters seem to focus on our reports today. That Greater Manchester local councils have spent a ballpark of 750 million dealing with COVID, and yet it looks like less than half of that money, around 320 million, has come to the GM councils from the government. I know we can only speak about Bolton today, but we all hear about the Greater Manchester figures. So that's a position for Bolton, if it's correct, of around 40 to 45% of COVID expenditure that's being covered. Is there an officer that could give me a view on that, please?
I'll take that one, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So obviously, we have been hit quite severely by the pandemic. We've suffered both additional costs and the loss of income during this financial year. And we, as you know, we have been providing regular updates to members. We've received about £20 million of emergency government support so far in this financial year, plus a further, I think it's probably up to about £10 million for specific responsibilities, and on top of that we have been given the money which we passported through to businesses under the government support scheme. Now, as members will be aware, we still do have a gap, and we are pressing the government extremely hard through every avenue possible to receive further funding, and we will continue to provide regular financial updates through the council, not least to the corporate scrutiny which meets on a regular basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. I now want to look at something, it's around page 10. I think it is page 10. It's the graph that talks about, in the report, cost of services by member portfolio. It's introduced by saying since 2016-17, a new analysis identifies what the cost of each service is before reserve transfers and how this balances to the overall funds available based upon how services report to executive members. So that table, it's mainly a blue and red column table, and it just shows the change from 1819 to 1920. So if we look at corporate resources, it says leader, that's leader and what we often describe as chief executive services combined. So the cost of service there in that portfolio has gone from 4 to 11, looking at that graph. I just need to get an understanding of, so if that's covering portfolios stroke, that chief executive services function in the council, is that really about policy decisions rather than something that's significantly changed on finance or the way you've moved things around? Is it, if you can give me anything just so I can understand that change on this meeting, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
I'll take that one, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So there will be a number of movements within that. I'm very happy to provide that after the meeting, but there will be a combination of price rises within the budget area. There could also have been movement of services between different departments, but quite often services move between portfolios within the council. So I'm very happy to provide an analysis through to committee following this meeting. Thank you, Chair. Oh,
I can't hear you, Councillor Howarth.
Please forgive me. Thanks very much. This is my last question. It's around page 19, where the pages start, any financial planning is underpinned by the following key principles, and it's a list of key principles there, and the key principles start prudent assessment of future resources and unfunded cost pressures. Just going to check people are happy that they're where I would want them to be, if the officers are okay. So it's probably the second in the list of key principles, and it says maximisation of income generated across all areas of the council and prompt collection of amounts owed to the council, minimisation of bad debts. It's possibly page 18. It's across page 18 and page 19. Okay, so that's a key principle that we follow, but I just want to get a bit more information around the thinking on those matters, because I'm familiar with the Treasury. So in the Treasury, in the Exchequer, of course, they have to think about somewhat the bigger picture on those sorts of things, because they try to calculate that if they make changes, then the total take could reduce, or the total take, often the concern is about if you do something around maximisation, it could reduce the total take. So I want to get a sense of whether in local government, and certainly in our local authority, we do that at all, whether we consider, not necessarily with a model, but whether we consider if we are seeking to maximise income generation across different streams, whether there's then any concern that, oh, we might end up with a position where we get less people paying for something, that, you know, a desire to non-pay would kick in. Thanks very much.
I'll take that, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yes, we absolutely do. We keep a very close eye on all the income streams coming into the council. I mean, clearly business rates and council tax are the two largest, and we monitor those on a monthly basis. So the teams, business rates, council tax teams who are responsible for billing, work very closely with the corporate finance teams. We monitor it particularly at the moment because we know we will have an impact in this year due to COVID. And then what we do is we build that information through into our medium-term financial strategy. So any changes for better or worse, we monitor during the year, then we will feed them into the following year's budget process as necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just going to switch back to the agenda now. I'm checking on chat box. There aren't any other members that have indicated, or officers that have indicated they wish to say anything. So this is probably the opportune time that I hand over to Mr. Mulholland now, because this is an item for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We need somebody, a member to move and a member to second it, and then we'll go to the vote, please.
Well, I think as chair I can move things. So I want to move that we approve the statement of accounts today as set out in the two documents that we've had chance to look at. Just need a second.
Is there a second,
Chair, and can we perhaps minute our thanks to the officers for their hard work in the situation they were faced with?
Yes, thank you very much. That's something I want to back that, Councillor Hayes. Thank you very much.
That's fine. I'll include that. Yes. Okay, it has been moved and seconded that the statement of accounts be approved. 4 against, abstain. Councillor Cox.
4.
Councillor Galloway.
4.
Councillor Howarth.
4.
Councillor Hayes.
4.
That's carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, item 6, is the audit completion report for the year end March 2020. And this is an item presented by our external auditors, Mazars, Karen Murray, partner at Mazars, and Ian Pinches might be with Karen Murray today as well. So I'll hand over to Karen. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. and I will take this report, so thank you very much. So this audit completion report is our final report that summarises our work on the two main areas that we do for the council. The first is the audit of the accounts, and the second is our work in respect of the council's value for money conclusion. And you will recall that we brought an audit strategy memorandum or an audit plan to an earlier meeting, I think a few months ago, setting out the risks that we'd identified as part of our audit planning work, and then telling you about the work that we propose to do to respond to those risks and to get the assurances that we need in order to give you the audit opinion. And this report effectively provides the feedback on that, on what we've done in terms of what we set out to do. You will see there is an executive summary, and in the executive summary I confirm for you that I propose to issue an unqualified opinion on both the council's accounts and in respect of value for money, and that's a very positive outcome. So that's the outcome that the council would have wanted. And I do want to echo comments that you've made already, Chair, if I may, about the quality of the accounts that were presented for audit and the working papers that support that, and also then the way in which the finance team have helped and supported us through the audit. I want to say a huge thank you to Sue Johnson as the Deputy Chief Executive for the support that she's provided, but perhaps more importantly to Tony Glennon and his team in finance, who work incredibly hard to help us. It turns out that auditing in a pandemic isn't particularly easy, so we are very grateful to them for the support and timeliness with which they've responded to what must at times have felt like a myriad of queries. You will see on page 4 of the report a sort of colour graded chart setting out the status of our work, and it shows that there is a small amount of work outstanding. Just to confirm that some of those are now complete, and I think we have a similar conversation to this every year. So the work on operating leases in respect of the airport land is now complete, and financial instruments have now been restated and agreed, so that is now all done. We are waiting for a very small number of things now. So one is we are waiting for some confirmation from our external valuer on the valuation of some of the council's investment properties, and we are waiting for confirmation from the Greater Manchester Pension Fund auditor about the data that the pension fund actuary has used to generate the information that goes into your accounts. Once we receive both of those things, we'll be able to complete our work. So the final point that is in the list there is really the kind of what I would call the final audit admin procedures and things that we can't complete until after this meeting anyway. If I refer you very briefly to page 5, you will see that the council's materiality level was 13.8 million, and that was unchanged from the planning stage, but group materiality was set at just over 14.5 million, 14.6 million, which we set once we received the council's accounts. Going through now each of the significant risks that were previously identified, we identified the management override of controls as a significant risk in the council's accounts, and it's important just to explain why that is a standard risk that applies in every set of accounts, because it's about the bits where management can directly influence the outcome of the financial statements. It's because of the decisions they take or the access that they have to systems and processes. We really look here at things that are matters of estimate or judgment, and we look at the council's journal transactions, because items posted by journals are usually done on instruction. In terms of estimates, I've talked already about the work that's outstanding on the property, plant and equipment valuations and the pension liability. Otherwise, everything on there was okay, and obviously I'll come back to those points later. On page 8, we talk about the risks in respect of the valuation of property, plant, equipment and investment properties. And what we've set out there for you is the work that we've done in the context that you rely on an external valuer to provide you with the information that goes into your accounts. We are waiting for our external valuer to conclude on some of the valuations in respect of your investment properties and a very small number of other queries, but I don't anticipate there being a problem, and I expect to receive a response from our valuer in the next day or two. Your valuer, however, has provided you with a valuation report which includes a material valuation uncertainty because of the impact of COVID-19. What your valuer is saying is perfectly logical in the circumstances, and it's the same in most local authority accounts at the moment, and it's consistent with professional guidance issued by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. In effect, your valuer is saying that there is a degree of uncertainty about the valuation of your assets at the 31st of March because of the impact of COVID and the pandemic. We are happy with the numbers that the valuer has provided you with, subject to that uncertainty. So we will need to modify our audit opinion to reflect the fact that you are disclosing that uncertainty in your accounts. I've talked very briefly already about the pension liability. This is something that is set out on page 9 as a risk for the council and for the group accounts. Again, we've set out for you the work that we've done. You rely on the actuary to provide you with the information. We've got the actuary's report, and that is properly reflected in your accounts. We're just now waiting confirmation from the pension fund auditor that the data that the actuaries used to generate that report is reliable. The same issue in respect of property valuations held by the pension fund will likely apply in terms of that material valuation uncertainty. And we are still working, and I say this as the pension fund auditor, we are still working to clarify the position in respect of those assets that the pension fund holds, which are generally and traditionally quite difficult to value, classed as level 3. And again, those things will need to be reflected in our opinion if they remain an issue at the end of the audit. On page 10, we talk about the work that we've done in respect of the council's share holding in Manchester Airport. Again, the council relies on an expert to provide that valuation. We look at the valuation using our own valuation team, and I've got no matters to report to you on that. We're satisfied with the value that's been reflected in your accounts, but which we notice is significantly lower than the previous year. We looked, as you will see on page 11, at the accounting treatment of schools in the council's accounts. There are no matters to draw to your attention. On page 12, we talk about the qualitative aspects of the accounts. So that's the stuff that's not the numbers, if you like. I've already commented on the quality of the accounts that were presented for audit and the hard work done by your team. The other issues that, if you like, were issues during the course of the audit in which we needed to have conversations about were the impacts of COVID-19 and funding streams on the council's accounts, and obviously lots to talk about the impacts on valuations. We also had a conversation with your team about the investment that the council has made in the Manchester Airport car park, and you have amended the accounts from those presented at draft to classify that as a fair value at, through comprehensive income accounts, which is the correct accounting treatment. There are no internal control matters that we need to bring to your attention. On page 13, you will see that we have picked up and reported to you again an unadjusted error that arose in last year's accounts. And members who were on the audit committee last year will remember me talking about a couple of legal cases, one of which was called McLeod, which was about equalisation of benefits, pension benefits, and an age discrimination case. That hasn't been amended in this year's accounts, and the reason for that is that the actuary has taken it into account. So you've got that it's not included in the numbers for last year, but it has been taken into account in the numbers for this year. So you didn't need to amend last year's accounts because the actuaries rolled it forwards into this year's accounts. There are no unadjusted errors in this year's accounts, I'm pleased to report, and only one adjusted error, which was in respect of the long-term liability for Greater Manchester, the old Greater Manchester Council debt, which has now been categorised by age as required by the code. So really that's enhancing disclosure rather than an error. And of course your financial instruments note has been amended as well. That's a technically complex note, so I'm going to leave that there, other than to say that we are happy now with the valuation. That's all I'm going to talk about in terms of the accounts. I'm going to move on now to talk about value for money, if I may. And I suppose this is a really interesting time for the council. We're required to give an opinion on the council's arrangements for value for money in respect of the 1920 year. And of course, it feels like an awful long time ago now that the council was setting its budget for 1920. At that time, the council expected to spend about £414 million, and that included the use of some reserves alongside a savings target of £23.5 million, which needed to be delivered. For most of the year, the arrangements were in place to monitor the delivery of those savings and to ensure that things were on track. And actually, the council was doing okay. There were some demand pressures, notably around children, but the council was well aware of the pressures, they were aware of the risk that presented, and were looking at options for taking recovery action. I think alongside that, it's important to note that the council had in place a very robust 2-year budget and medium-term financial strategy. You'd made a series of assumptions that you could update as and when government information became available, for example, about funding and streams and so on, grants and so on. And you were working on a 2021 budget, which was then set to use some reserves and but required the delivery of some savings. And it's important to note that those savings were in a way were considered to be transformational activity. Again, quite happy that at the point that that budget was set and subsequently the council had very good arrangements in place, was working well. But then, of course, we've been hit by COVID, haven't we? So in terms of the current year, you have faced significant additional costs, particularly in children's and adults. You've had significant amounts of lost income, particularly fees and charges, the airport dividend and loan repayments, and around council tax and business rate collection. None of that is a surprise to any of you, but it does mean that the 2021 financial position is very difficult. And I think it's also important to be absolutely aware that the council's focus has not been on delivering those transformational savings. It simply couldn't be, because of the need to maintain critical services and to work so hard on business continuity matters. The consequence of that is that you have got a very significant financial challenge to face going forwards. And I need to be absolutely clear with you that in my professional view, you cannot rely on reserves to get you out of this. This is not a sustainable position. It means that the council will need to take some very difficult strategic decisions about the level and style of services you want to provide for residents of Bolton, and the way in which you want to deliver your capital programme, and in particular your regeneration ambitions across the borough. I'm going to be very blunt now and tell you that I think the situation is urgent, it is serious, and it is very difficult. I'm going to pause there and take any questions if I can in respect of either the accounts or the value for money conclusion, and then I can come back and pick up on the point about the objection that was made earlier, if that's okay with members.
So at the moment in the chat box, I've just got an item from members that is that's going. We've certainly got one person who's going to speak when you address the objection, but I'm first going to bring in Deputy Leader Councillor Cox.
Thanks for that, Karen. Can I just pick up on the sort of last few statements you made? Is there do you see any difference between what the challenge that Bolton is facing in comparison with what other similar authorities, such as those in AGMA, are also facing, or is there something unique or distinct about Bolton's challenge?
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that there are significant challenges across the whole of AGMA, and this is one of those times when it's one of very few occasions actually where it's probably better to be the auditor commenting on it than either the officers or the members that need to deal with it. I think it's fair to say that different councils across Greater Manchester are in different places, and a lot of that depends on the extent to which they've got reserves or they have got those transformational savings plans either in train or have done them in previous years. I think there are a number of councils that are going to face some very, very difficult challenges. Relatively speaking, you do have reserves that will see you through for a short period, but they're not going to sustain the level of services that you currently provide for the longer term, unless there are some other decisions taken by other parts, by other parts of the process. I think it's not helped, for instance, by the fact that we don't quite know about the outcome of the spending review and what your financial settlement may be for next year, the year after, and so on. And of course, the extent to which you need to make savings will change as and when those things crystallise. You are at the moment filling in returns, and Sue's probably far better placed than I am to comment on the level of detail that's required in these returns, but you are filling in fairly comprehensive returns for MHCLG on a regular, probably monthly basis, I think now, to set out the loss of income from fees and charges and so on. And we know that there is a plan to compensate you for some, but not all of that. And also there are proposals around the way in which you might seek to recover the deficit that will likely arise on your collection fund because of the reduction in collection rate, and how you might recover that over a 3-year period, which is not normally allowed. So there are a whole number of technical things which will help to mitigate some of those challenges, but they don't fundamentally take away the risk that the council faces, and every local authority is dealing with something similar.
Just come back, Chair. I think that's certainly a fair comment in terms of the spending review. Until we know how much we're going to get, it's very difficult for Sue and her team to properly plan. But I think the point that we're going to have a significant squeeze is one well made, and I think one that all politicians on the council understand. Just one other point I want to make on what you were saying initially, and you referred to the valuation of the shares in the airport. You were saying you take professional advice on that and you accept that as being correct. Was that valuation done before COVID? And are you able to tell us what impact COVID is likely to have on the valuation of that holding?
Okay, thank you. Oh gosh, that is a rather difficult question to answer, but I'm going to do my best. So the council works with the other Greater Manchester authorities who own an equal share with you in getting a valuation for your shareholding in the airport. So that's all of the Greater Manchester councils with the exception of the City Council. You all own an equal 4.something% share, which I'm sure either Tony or Sue will be able to correct me if I've given you the wrong number there, but it's approximately that number. And so there is then a third share held by the City Council and a third share held by the private sector. You work together as one set of authorities to get a valuation for your collective share, and then you divide that out because you own it equally, so that's quite easy. And you employ collectively a firm of professional services firm, very similar to Mazars, to do that work for you. The way in which they arrive at that valuation is using a very complicated set of formulas and rules that reflect the income that the airport has earned in the period, its potential for the future, and a whole series of different complex calculations, if you like, to arrive at your shareholding. So it does, in effect, reflect some of the impacts of COVID, and that is why the value of the shareholding has gone down from 50 odd million at the 31st of March 2019 to only 30 million at the 31st of March 2020. And that would seem to be perfectly reasonable. You don't need to recognise the impact of that loss in value on your in your comprehensive income and expenditure account, thankfully, and that's because you own these shares for a strategic reason, because it's right that the council owns its share of the airport and you don't own them particularly for their income generation. So you don't need to take the loss into account. It doesn't impact the taxpayer. There is, of course, a recovery plan in place at the airport because I think we all recognise that the airline industry and the holiday industry and so on is particularly challenging. So there is a plan in place. The value will likely move again by next year. Whether it moves up or down, I guess, will depend on how quickly things start to get back to normal, and how well the airport does in the context of the business plan that it put together. That business plan was predicated on a worst and a best case scenario, and then several points in between, and decisions that have been taken since by the councils collectively, including the City Council, are all about making sure that you take the right course of action to help and support the airport through some challenging times. It's probably better that I hand over to Sue to talk about anything else relating to the airport, because I'm not very close to it. We, in the sense of the decisions that you might be taking, we use our own valuation team to review the work that your valuer does to make sure that the way in which they've arrived at that valuation is reasonable and it's taken into account all of the factors that it should. And I'm pleased to say that we were happy with the way in which your valuer had come to the value that's in the accounts.
Yeah, just Chair, just before Sue comes in. I mean, we do own the shares because of the revenue they produce. I wouldn't like us to be in any doubt about that, because we borrowed £100 million on the strength of it, and we simply, cannot allow the airport to fail. And I think what has happened over the last 12 months is the airport has gone from providing a regular and substantial income to the council. Not only has that been cut off, but it's gone into reverse. We're now providing the airport with capital. You know, I mean, I'm sure it was just a slight slip of the tongue, but we absolutely do own the airport shares for revenue, and it's you know, it's essential that that airport gets back up and running as soon as possible, because its income is extremely important to the council, not only to support its services but to fund the borrowing taken on to support the investment in the town centre.
Let me just come back on that before Sue comes in, because in accounting terms, you do get the income, but you don't hold the shares purely for the income. You do hold the shares because it's right that you do. It's a strategic investment. If it were the other way, then you would need to let the council taxpayer take the hit on the change in the value of the shares. So we don't want that. That wouldn't be the right answer. The shares are not, they're not available for you to sell. I think that's the way in which the distinction arises. You wouldn't want to do that.
If things carry on, we might not get anyone to buy them. Anyway, okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Sue Jones. Sue, are you coming in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think most of the points have already been raised. I think it's probably just worth highlighting that yes, you know, our investment in Manchester Airport goes back many years, as it does for all the authorities in Greater Manchester. It is, you know, it has provided, you know, great opportunities for the region in terms of investment, in terms of local employment, etc. Clearly, it's going through a very difficult phase. So we do have, a loss of the dividend income into the council, which will impact upon the cuts that we have to make in the following year. We have, as all shareholders, agreed to provide a shareholder loan into Manchester Airport as part of its plans to keep itself as viable as it can do over this pandemic, whilst it, looks at what it can do. It's taken many steps itself to cut its costs, not least with the announcement of job losses in the last couple of weeks. So it is working extremely hard to maintain its viability. It's keeping all shareholders very much up to date with its current position, and we just hope that over the coming months it's able to stabilise its position. But we do receive regular updates from them. So I'll pass back to yourself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just want to go back to two things you've already mentioned. So on, forgive me, on page 11, there's that small paragraph, the accounting treatment of the council's investment in the new Manchester Airport car park company. And you told us that through dialogue with Bolton Council finance officers, the investment report is designated now at fair value. Can you remind me whether that was a movement? Was it designated at a different position? It's possibly dropped to fair value from something else, has it, Karen?
Thanks, Chair. This is it's slightly complicated. It was always a fair value investment. It's just more about where it sits in the council's accounts. This is a new loan. That's the other thing. So I think really it may be the report may suggest that there was more wrong with it than there was. We agreed the accounting treatment is really what I mean to say.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to flick to a note that I made. I think I'm there. I think you touched on this. Let me just get my notes from when you spoke. When you referred to something that was I think I'm right, some finance that might change, but not necessarily in this report, but the next financial year. And this was where you said there'd been an age discrimination case. And the note that I made for myself is that it feels like it's recently reported that public sector pension reforms were ruled unlawful and are a cost to taxpayers of 17 billion. Yeah, I think what I'm asking really is whether this is simply going to be a government issue, but perhaps not, because you've alluded to it. So I formed a question around the government said it faces the bill for tackling this unlawful, that's right, age discrimination in public sector pensions with around 3 million people are going to be set to benefit from some finance. They're going to get an allocation, and this apparently does include the NHS, some staff, but teachers, armed forces, civil service, police, firefighters, schemes. That's the thing. It's about these schemes. So the question is really, is this about government payment, or will it affect the pension matters at this council and also Greater Manchester? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So pensions are really quite complicated things. All of the schemes that you mentioned, when you mentioned the NHS, you mentioned government pension schemes, and you mentioned police and firefighters, are what are known, and teachers are what are known as unfunded schemes. So the government does need to deal with that. The local government pension scheme is a little bit different because it's a funded scheme. So you know, employers and employees make their contributions over time, and that funds the benefits that are due to be paid. So local government pension scheme was considered separately, and the fund actuary has now taken it into account. So the government has issued what it thinks is that it's planned for rectifying, including the time period over which you can do that, and that's now been taken into account by the actuary. So there is no new bill coming for pension liabilities, if that's what was driving your question, if I'm interpreting that properly.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm glad I asked, because I did lack that information, that knowledge. Do you want to now move on to talk about the other matter that you had? Because I've no indications in the chat box from anybody that they want to speak. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you again. So just to be clear, there is a limit to how much information I can give you in the public domain. So members will need to just bear in mind that I can only talk about the process that we are going through, not the detail of the objection that was made. So what I will say is that you will be aware that the objection related to last year's accounts, and it was in respect of some payments that the council makes under a particular fund to third parties in order for them to deliver projects for you. The allegation related to the fact, or the initial objection related to the fact that the person who was objecting believed that the third party that had received the contribution from the council had in fact received more than 100% of the cost of the scheme, because they had received funding from various different public sector sources. Following on from the most recent correspondence from the elector, there is now a very clear suggestion from the individual that they believe now that this matter is criminally motivated, as opposed to what I might previously have called administrative arrangements in the council. Now, as the council's external auditor, I don't investigate anything that may be criminally related. So the matter has been referred firstly to your internal audit team, and Tom is aware of the issues that have been reported, and I have gone back to the individual concerned and said that the matters might be better dealt with by the police. I am liaising with Tom, and we will continue to do what we can on the objection, but you will appreciate that it is very difficult for us to investigate something that may be part of a criminal investigation or could become in the future, because the one thing we can't do is disrupt anything there. So I probably can't say very much more than that, really, and I appreciate that's not terribly helpful.
Thank you very much for setting that out. I'm going to take a question, or Councillor Hayes is going to speak. Thank you.
Actually, Chair, it was just a reminder to raise that point that's been raised, so I don't need to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Hayes. Sorry if I misunderstood that you were wanting to make sure it was going to be that we were going to get some information on that matter today.
Chair, can I just make one more comment, which is to say that there are no objections in respect of the council's 1920 accounts, so there are no new matters arising that members of committee need to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you very much, because that's an important citizen's right. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the main agenda now.
That item for noting then?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Thank you. That was item 6, a matter for consideration. we can move now to item 7. This is the Internal Audit Q2 Assurance and Progress Report, another item for consideration from the Head of Internal Audit, Tom Powell, and one of the officers, Richard Thomas. Thank you very much. Okay, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. It's just me, unfortunately, because we've had some connection issues with Richard. So I'll introduce the report and then happy to take any questions. This is, as you've said, Chair, the internal audit update to the end of September 2020, which confirms progress to date in the delivery of the plan and assurances in the year thus far. The plan, I think, as discussed as part of the audit planning session that we had with committee and the setting of the annual plan, has obviously been impacted by COVID-19, and the report does describe some of the new work that we've done in Q1, particularly focused on the range of business grants and other work that we've done to support Bolton businesses, and that work is ongoing. In the period, we've also been able to finalise some audits, and those are set out in section 2, where we've also described the key points arising from that work. Finally, the report confirms that Appendix 1, the areas of audit focus through to the year end, and is presented today for any audit committee assurance and comments.
Thanks very much, Tom. Anybody who's indicated in the chat box at the moment, I'm happy to go to I think it's the first page, where there's a table of internal audit outputs, April to September 2020. And we've got one there. We've got a school that's highlighted as it's listed as high value payments, and yet your opinion is limited. So I think that's possibly, I'll just whiz down the only question. No, I probably have got another question. I'll just ask each question in turn, I think. Is there anything you want to add about assurance to the committee on that matter, please?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so the audit was, as you described, it was around high value payments, so higher value procurement exercises rather than lower supplies and services type work. And our issue around that, as described in the report, is around where actual procedures within the school didn't conform with the council's requirements around the scheme of financial delegation and standing orders. And therefore we made recommendations, particularly to that school, about how they could correct those arrangements. And we do plan to do some further schools with a similar type of audit in the current year as well. As a result of that, if we have a number of schools and there are thematic issues arising, what we tend to do with that is write a report to our colleagues in education and also send something out to all schools to remind them of expected and best practice.
Okay, thank you. If you do find you just score something at a limited opinion, do you ever need to go back if it's just to check, or do you tend to just, as you say, look for themes and take it forward that way?
There's my red box. Yes, with all limiteds, Chair, and this would apply to any audit both within the council or with schools, there is a specific follow-up done to ensure that actions agreed as part of the plan. So any audit that you see with limited assurance, you can all be assured that there is a further, more formal follow-up to that individual client, business area or school to ensure that actions are taken as agreed.
Thank you. If we move on then to 2.13, and this is where it talks about some audit work you've done, core audit work, and this is in people services, and it talks about individual appointee service users raised within the report do not seem to have been investigated fully and there is still no standard process to gain assurance that appointees' monies are being appropriately managed. This seems to speak to the subject of financial safeguarding of vulnerable people. Is that something then that you pick up with the Department for People? Is this an issue that, am I seeing too much into that, or is this an area of concern that you're speaking to senior managers about? Thank you.
Just having an issue switching camera. Sorry, Tom.
There we go. No, I think your senses are picking up where there are issues, Councillor Howard. So it is, you're right, absolutely. It's about financial safeguarding. It cuts across both people and corporate resources because these are around finance roles as well. But you're absolutely right to pick out the need for further improvements in that area. I think we recognise over the last 6 months possibly some actions that management agreed may not have progressed as intended, simply because of the other demands on them due to the response to the pandemic. But I think it's right that we share with Audit Committee in areas like that. Progress hasn't been as thorough as we would want it to be, and will be an area again of ongoing audit discussion with senior management.
Thank you. I'll just whiz down the paper in case there's any. That's my last question, and I don't have any other indications from members at the moment. So I'm just going to move back to the agenda. Okay, we can move now to item 8, and that is the corporate risk register. This is for members to consider, and this is from Tom Powell, Head of Audit. Thank you.
Item 7 will be noted, Chairman. Are you happy with that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the for Audit Committee assurance purposes. This is the latest refresh of the corporate risk register for Bolton Council. The report sets out our approach that we take around updating the corporate risk register, as well as a copy of the actual register as discussed and agreed at the most recent corporate leadership team. It sets out the categories and the approach that we use to assess risks, and at paragraph 213 lists the risks in summary as are recorded on the current risk register. And they include a number of risks that have been impacted by COVID-19 and the pandemic. Apologies, in my version, table 2.8 is blank. I don't know if the same is with yours, and it shouldn't be. But so something's certainly gone awry in my version of the report. So for completeness, just want to confirm, apologies to members, that there are 5 high risks in the risk register, 2 of which relate to what we describe as Bolton as a place, 2 of which relate to finance and resources. And I think that does link and echo the comments of the external auditor in the previous items around the difficult medium-term financial outlook, not just for Bolton Council, but across local government and the public services, and 1 high risk which relates to performance as well. So those are where the key risks will impact, but the register sets out those in a little bit more detail. Finally, apologies, just to note that the risk register is a dynamic document, and so there are mitigating controls and planned actions being developed all the time. I think it's important to acknowledge that the risk register shouldn't just be something that sits on a shelf and is updated on an ongoing basis. So items will be added to and amended on the register on an ongoing basis by corporate leadership team and departmental leadership teams. But I hope that the report provides assurance to Audit Committee about the approach being taken to oversee our strategic and corporate risks. But happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have anyone indicating in the chat at the present time. Forgive me, we might have. Yes, I think so. Sorry, I need to. I'll just double check. Sorry, need to update my chat box. Got Councillor Cox. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Tom. Just a quick question, really. If a council were to ask you, what's the biggest risk facing the council at the moment, Tom, what would you say?
Money. I think it probably is the medium term.
Too much of it. Is that the problem?
Sadly not, Councillor Cox. No, I think clearly current challenges about responding to pandemic, support to Bolton businesses, changes in national funding arrangements and the spending review. There's a lot of uncertainty around the medium term financial position. I think officers are doing a sterling job to try and plan for that, but I think in common with many, not just public service, but colleagues across the economy as a whole, it's very difficult to plan for that medium term financial stability at the moment. So the short answer is money, the longer one is the diatribe I've just given.
Yeah, and is there anything you would be able to identify as being Bolton specific? I mean, that what you've given is absolutely fair, and I understand entirely what you're saying, and I agree with it. But is there something that you would identify as being a Bolton specific problem?
I wouldn't necessarily describe it as problems. I think there are some more specific challenges. We obviously have ambitious, ambitious ambitions. We have clear ambitions around town centre development and the support to townships across the borough, which obviously has an impact around capital programme, and that's a key strategy obviously for the council, and that would be difficult to balance alongside potential impacts on revenue budgets. And I would also, it's not an order to get together, but I would probably also align with some of Karen's points earlier from the external audit perspective of being sure that we don't rely on reserves in terms of our medium-term financial strategy. As also the council's head of insurance, I'm always keen to make sure we hold some reserves back for those difficult times. I think it's really important we don't rely too much on reserves and use them as part of an overall strategy of, frankly, cost reduction as part of the medium-term financial plan.
Yeah. Just one more comment. I don't know whether this is a risk or whether it's even something that can be addressed here. But you know, we are bidding for the Towns Fund and High Street funding, and if they were all to come in, you know, we're talking about capital receipts of about £70 million coming into the councils. And it just strikes me that we're going to have quite a significant imbalance between revenue resource and capital. We're never going to, I don't think in our history have ever had so much capital, but a shortage of revenue, and that just seems to be getting, you know, there's potential it could get significantly out of kilter, you know, and very difficult, I think, for the public to understand that we're telling them we're having to cut all these services, and yet starting huge building projects all around the town, it won't make sense to many people, I wouldn't have thought. I don't know whether that's could be classified as a risk, but I think there's a growing imbalance there between revenue and capital, and I think, you know, it's going to reach a point where the public might get quite confused about that message of reducing expenditure whilst at the same time carrying out big capital projects.
Yeah, I mean, the Deputy Chief Exec might want to comment, but I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Cox, in terms of that public perception of buildings going up and refurbishments taking place. And I think, you know, there are other councils. I'm thinking of one where I'm heading off to shortly in terms of Manchester Audit Committee, where there's similarly points around the factory as a large development and the refurbishment of the town hall, whilst meanwhile revenue resources are reducing, and it is a difficult message.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Sue wants to comment on that at all, but I do agree with your point, absolutely.
Yeah, happy to come in. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is a really valid point, and I think it just highlights the challenges we are facing, but also that there are still opportunities out there that we can do some good across the borough, and we shouldn't shy away from looking for those opportunities and to pull in some money if it's the right thing to do some good work. But equally, the messaging is going to be critical, because it doesn't feel right, does it? Money in on money out. So it is a challenge, but we do have ambitions, and the more that we can actually pull money in to achieve some of them, if not all of them, it may look different, but if we can do it, then it's the right thing to do. We should continue pursuing those avenues. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. I want to add to that and first say that it is a very comprehensive report, and I thought it was very, very clear and very concise on the huge difficulties that we are facing at the council, particularly financially. I accept that people have just spoken to what the public eyes would be on, perhaps the government wanting to fund some of our capital programmes, and then yet there may be concern when they look on and find that we would really struggle in any way to carry on with some of the services that we've hitherto wanted to provide for people that they have needed in the borough, and that's across a number of different services. But neither do we at this present time have any support for the commercial finance within the council, and that's where we're up against it, because as we've been told already on the meeting, we have been reliant upon a revenue stream from the commercial area of Manchester Airport, and the government has not sought to assist the council on that, and the government has not. It gave a promise, didn't it, that it would cover us for our COVID expenditure, and we're woefully inadequate on getting anywhere near that cover. So that again is a struggle around our revenue spend. The other struggle that we've got on our revenue spend, as I've alluded to, is the formula has worked against us, and there is a great worry going forward that the formula will work against Bolton Council. We're in the north, we have deprivation, and I've already spoken in other areas that I'm very cross that the government quite clearly have operated to provide finance to areas that have finance and do very well, and they do very well on their council tax take, because their communities do very well for themselves. And the only other thing that's come to mind of concern around finance for us is that we've got a considerable percentage in Bolton, even when you look at the Greater Manchester statistics of workers. I'm not talking about council workers, I'm talking about what we know of the population who've been on furlough. So again, we really are up against it when it comes to the need of our population in here, in this town. And I think this is very well set out in terms of the pressures that the council faces in this document. So thanks very much to the audit staff and yourself, Tom, for this paper. I'm just going to flick to the agenda now.
I'll record that as a noting then, Chair, if you're happy. Thank you.
Yes, that item was for consideration, so thanks very much. Two more items. We've got item 9. We're back to finance, and this is the Treasury Management Outturn report for quarter 4, 2019-2020. I think that's Tony Glennon. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies about to move office because my Wi-Fi dropped off. Yeah, so this is quarter 4 Treasury Management Outturn for 1920. So this report was considered by Executive Cabinet Member on the 16th of July. It's presented to Audit Committee as part of its scrutiny role. All indicators were as approved by Council in February 19. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I don't have anybody indicating in the chat box at the moment. I just want to, on both of the reports, actually, it's on the next report as well, which is the quarter 1. One of the investments, so I think I'm talking about Appendix 3, the last page. So rather than asking specifically, I'll just ask in general terms. So we may invest in obviously different councils. We make investments from time to time, short-term investments. Might it be problematic if it's a council that we invest in for financial benefit, if it's a council that has come to a position of really having quite a heavy commercial portfolio? So there's been quite a bit, hasn't there, about councils who've chosen to do that, where they've become really quite highly commercial on the finance side of it. They've sought to develop a lot of additional finance for themselves through commercial investment. If we are then investing in them, does that put our risk up in any way, or does it not really matter? Is it a different sort of area of their council, and it would just be beneficial for us to carry on making these small investments or investments in councils? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the three key principles that we follow when we're doing any investments, what's called the SLI model, ensuring that investments are secure, that they're liquid so we can get to them, and finally the yield. That's the third of the three options. With regard to councils, effectively they're classed as going concerns and unlikely to be allowed to fail, and it's likely that the government would step in, so we don't see them as a risk, and we've tended to move towards councils more recently because the rates that they're actually paying are better than the banks are offering.
Thanks very much for that feedback. Okay, I think that's an item for our consideration, Ian Mulholland. So I've got no other indications in the chat box on that. So I think we can note that report and just check on the agenda. If everybody's happy, we can go on to the next item, the last item, which is the Treasury Management Outturn report for Q1 of 2020-21, please. Tony, thank you.
Okay, so the same report just moved forward to the end of June 2020. As it says, it was approved by the Executive Cabinet member on the 8th of September 2020. So again, it's presented as part of Audit Committee's scrutiny role. Just to note that because we got £68 million of business grants in early April, we did go over some of our limits, but that was only for a short period of time, 3 to 4 weeks, because we knew the business grants were coming into the council's accounts and then were going to be paid out pretty much immediately. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions on this? This is an item for consideration. I don't have any questions on this because the similar thing drew my attention, as I've already asked about on the other report. Okay, members seem happy. We've considered that, so thanks very much for that report. Now that brings us to the end of the Audit Committee today. Thanks very much to everybody for your attendance.
John Duckett, please can you end the live meeting? Thank you.